Well, hello again. So it's Saturday, and I am tired of talking about dirty, unwashed, crusty, dusty, ignorant, uneducated, codependent baby mamas on the internet. So instead, I thought I would do something random and talk about a woman who has literally possessed almost every waking thought I've had since the age of 12. Who am I talking about? I'm talking, of course, about Anne Boleyn. But specifically, I want to talk about the one thing about her that I cannot get off my mind. And that is the fact that I think she was an AuDHD woman. And I got the notes to prove it, so let's get into it. So first of all, number one, Anne Boleyn was a multi-potentialite. And for those who don't know what that is, it's basically someone who has a lot of skills and talents across a lot of different areas of interest. They're like super curious, skilled, talented people. Anne Boleyn was definitely that. She could read, write, and speak multiple languages. She could read and compose music. She played multiple instruments. She was a voracious reader. She could sing really, really well, and she was a fantastic dancer. She could speak and debate with some of the most educated men in the country on the topics of history, politics, theology, a little bit of economics, war, basically anything, which is unheard of at the time because women weren't really educated and just happened to come from a family that thought women should be a little bit educated. She also had a skill set of being able to charm people or to turn the mood of a conversation, turn the direction of a conversation without people even knowing that they were able to do it. And I'm listing this as a multi-potentialite skill because she seemed to like study people and understand them and know how to work them. Number two, by and large, people just didn't like her, even if they didn't have a reason to. Like when she walked into a room, people either loved her or hated her. And she like maybe didn't even have to talk sometimes. Even before she was queen, like the historical record, the preference from the court and from people that knew them, and even from Anne's own family, is for her little brother George, who was the golden child and the heir, and her older sister Mary, who was like really, really, really pretty, and everybody was like, yeah, titties. Anyway, and it continues to this day. Anne was either loved or hated. And it seems to not matter, even if she did try to correct that. It was just like people were either loyal to her to death or they just like hated her and wanted her to die. What does that sound like, neurodivergent girlies? Number three, when it came to her family, Anne was really treated as like the least of the children. And she was the second girl, the youngest girl out of the three surviving Boleyn children. So yeah, like that played in a little bit. But it's like almost dismissive, even though Anne got sent abroad by her family when she was like 10 years old, and she went with her sister. And the whole time Anne was abroad, all these women that were educating her fell in love with her. They would write letters back to her dad and be like, yeah, Mary, but Anne, like, holy crap, this girl is so smart. She's so smart. She's like so good at everything. And the Boleyn family were just like, yeah, okay. Everything in her family really centered on Mary and on George. And even after Anne got brought back to court, she was just an afterthought to her family. They toyed around with the idea of putting her in this marriage where she would have gotten exiled to Ireland, which was like at that time, with England doing colonialism in Ireland, it was really terrible. And it was like considered a really rough place to live. And it was considered to be like exile, which is not good for someone who was as cosmopolitan as Anne Boleyn, who loved being in the center of culture and art and history and all that kind of stuff. So she comes to the English court and she's a shining star, and her family basically is just like, man, we got George to worry about. And Mary, did you hear Mary's having sex with the king? So Anne just like, her family was just like, yeah, I mean, you do all these things really well. That's super impressive. Cool. Again, AuDHD girlies, what does that sound like? Now here's the real meat and potatoes of why my theory sits this way. Pathological demand avoidance or pathological drive for autonomy. Either one, you could, I would argue that our definition of Anne Boleyn is built on this. When she got brought back to the English court and her family basically just forgot about her to go and chase Mary's affair with the king, Anne went, okay, fine, I'll arrange my own marriage. And she did. She nabbed one of the most eligible bachelors at court, Henry Percy, who was like super loaded, came from this really prestigious family, lots of power, yada, yada, yada. And she just bagged that herself, and nobody knew about it until it was done. Very much like, okay, you want to forget about me? I'll do this myself. When that marriage got discovered, Anne got into a lot of trouble, specifically with Cardinal Wolsey, who was the most powerful man in the kingdom. He did all of the work. He was second only to the king. He was the king's best friend, and no one ever questioned him until Anne Boleyn. When Wolsey broke off her marriage to Henry Percy, this is like recorded in all these places, she allegedly basically said to him, you've made an enemy of me here this day, and if it is ever in my power to do you ill, oh, I'm going to do it. And this is from like a 20-something-year-old girl at court, right? I would argue that even her pursuit of the king kind of fits into that drive for autonomy. Because again, no one thought Anne Boleyn would be queen. No one thought Anne Boleyn would be queen. So her even like going so far to secure it in the way that she did without selling herself out like her sister did, it feels a lot like, oh, you guys think I can't do this? Okay, you just come and let me know what your feelings are after I'm in charge of you. Even as queen, we see that drive for autonomy again. Like Anne Boleyn would sit in meetings that only men were allowed in. And there were points in her marriage with Henry where like you couldn't even you couldn't even send him a letter unless you spoke to Anne first. And there's documented times where like Wolsey would come in to have a private meeting with Henry and would basically say like, aren't you going to send her away? And Anne would basically buck up right behind the king and refuse to leave. I also think that we could see some of this PDA in her outbursts. There are several documented explosive emotional outbursts on Anne's behalf. And they always happen when she, like, the basics are getting disrespected. Like when she walked in a room and she saw Jane Seymour sitting on her husband's lap, having a nice little cozy moment with her husband. So she, who was also pregnant at the time, I believe, understandably lost her shit, slapped Jane, said, get out of my house, and then went after Henry in front of everybody, right? When she was wronged, she would just go after people. She didn't care what it looked like, nothing. Okay, so now number 5, Anne Boleyn had a super strong sense of justice. It's what got her killed. She gave something like 14 times more alms to the poor than any queen before her. She pushed for the Reformation because she was disgusted by the religious houses and the fact that religious houses in England were supposed to educate and provide for the poor, and they weren't doing that. They were hoarding wealth for themselves and cheating the people of England. And she was like, that's wrong. Like, these are supposed to be houses for people. So, like, if you're not doing your job, I'm going to shut you down. She regularly intervened for female petitioners who were getting screwed over. So like a woman's husband would die and a bunch of the men at court would basically like steal the houses and the money and be like, you stupid woman, there's nothing you can do about it. Anne Boleyn would find out about it and she would raise hell to get them their money. She wanted false relics destroyed because she thought they were scams and fraudulent and she didn't want people being scammed. Even though it was heresy, she left an open English Bible in her rooms and encouraged anyone in her rooms who worked for her, lived in that space, to read from it because she thought everyone deserved to read the Bible. She went out of her way to protect and rescue humanists from France. Even her being a humanist itself, endorsed by Erasmus, is like a huge AuDHD sign to me. She seemed to have this extreme, boundless energy that would result in these crashes, right? Where she would then like lay in bed for a couple of days or she would have these big stomach pains or she would get sick. Number 8, she did seem to have reproductive issues, which can be a comorbidity with AuDHD. And last but not least, here's the big like kicker and clincher for me. Anne Boleyn did not seem to be a woman who was able to conform. She did not seem like she physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually seemed unable to conform. Like she just could not play the bullshit game. She could not stand back and just be like a punching bag nothingness like Catherine had kind of been when it came to Henry. She just didn't have that ability. She shot off at the mouth. If she didn't agree with something, she would say it. If she felt something was right to protect, she would do it. She just did not fit the mold of a woman at that time. And all of these things, plus knowing that the human brain is basically unchanged for 100,000 years, makes me question if this was an AuDHD queen. I don't know. It's Saturday. Let me know what you think in the comments. Follow for more.